Welcome back to the Peak Wealth Podcast. My name is John Perry. Today I have Mark Gotlieb with me, trust and estate attorney extraordinaire. Mark is going to be a regular guest for the Peak Wealth Podcast, and we're going to delve into different estate planning topics. I wanted Mark to be my first guest on the show because I think this is one of the most important and vital aspects of overall financial planning and financial health. There are so many topics that we can talk about when it comes to estate planning, but today I think we're going to focus mostly on probably the most basic of estate planning instruments, and that's the will. So, Mark, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself, your experience, and then we'll tackle wills.
Sure. First of all, thank you, John, for having me as your first guest of your show. We've been friends for a very long time. Give you some background on me. I grew up actually here in South Florida. I am an estate planning attorney. I went to undergraduate in New York, went to law school in New York, wound up moving back home, working with my father for about 5 years, merged that firm into a mid-sized firm based out of Miami. And over time, went to a few different firms and opened up my own shop. I want to say about almost 7 years ago, in October. I have twins that are turning 9 in August. I can't believe that.
Time flies.
Time flies, and I'm just happy to be here. Really
I
appreciate
better have
it.
you. By the way, I know a good estate attorney that you might want to utilize when you're
Sure.
ready to do that for your children.
Would love to take some names. No problem.
Well, like I said, what I really want to tackle today, Mark, is just wills and talk about it really is the most simple of estate planning tools. People hear about them all the time from everything in movies, TV shows. Really, it's just something that I think is instilled in the population as to what good and bad. If I have a will, I'm covered, which is kind of a misnomer there in terms of that's got you all set in your estate planning. But one of the most shocking things that when I was preparing for the podcast with you, in looking at some of the statistics, that really there are so many people that either don't have a will still, that are even in their 40s and their 50s, or they haven't updated their will. And really, as important and vital a tool the will is, it's less effective if you don't keep up with it.
Sure.
Like
Anything else,
right.
like working out, right? Your body goes downhill if you don't constantly update.
Right. And laws change,
Sure.
situations change. Obviously, when you have half the families out there or the couples out there get divorced, obviously that creates a situation where wills need to be updated. I think being here in Florida, one of the things we see most commonly, or I do, is say somebody moves down here from the Northeast, and states differ in terms of their treatment of estates and taxation. And someone who moves down here from, say, New York or New Jersey needs to update their will, don't they?
Typically, yes.
Yeah.
Typically, yes.
And I come across a lot of people that might have moved down here 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10. Look at all the people that moved down here during the pandemic. And I would venture to say there's probably a good amount of them that now it's a few years since we're out of the pandemic, and they haven't updated those wills.
Sure. So, a lot of things that you said. One thing in particular that I think is really important is I always say to people, I have colleagues. I don't have competition. Not from an arrogant standpoint, but we all kind of work nice in the play yard, right? We all play well together.
It's a community.
It's a community, exactly. And I always also joke we're right across from a fancy steakhouse right here from this where we're recording.
One that we've dined at together a number of times.
Yes, we have. And one of the things that I always say is if you go to any of these steakhouses on a Friday night, packed, right? This is Boca Raton, Florida. I mean, it's packed on a Friday or Saturday night. If you actually had everyone raise their hands in the room, who here has a will? Never mind a trust, never mind all the other stuff. Who has just the basic, what I call the four horsemen, right? The will, power of attorney, healthcare surrogate document, and living will. You know, the pull the plug, the pseudo DNR.
Right.
I call those like the four horsemen.
And
right?
we'll delve into those in other podcasts because they're
Sure.
all important.
Sure. So if you ask people, raise your hand if you have one. Chances are, maybe half the room.
Right.
And it's shocking to me.
Yeah.
It's shocking because with all the estate planning attorneys out in Boca, and you could throw a stone and you hit one, right? Maybe half the room has them. So that I say that because I know that we're going to delve into a little bit some more technical slides
statistics,
and it's shocking to me. Another thing that you mentioned was, well, people come down here, and when they come down, shouldn't they update? I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not even a function of if you moved here from another state, because yes, every state laws for estate purposes is different, tax purposes differ. But it's really what you said. Was there a life event? Was there a death, a birth, a divorce,
a
marriage, right? Those are the telltale signs of we've had a life event. We should probably update or have someone just review it to make sure it's okay. I get a lot of those clients, and I made a comment earlier about, do you have to update? I said, maybe. And the reason why I say that is and I always tell this to clients that come in from other states, especially New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. My wife is from Massachusetts, so I can say that.
I love that.
But, those higher jurisdictions, those high tax jurisdictions, as long as the documents were validly executed in the state or the country where they were executed, it's valid. It doesn't invalidate the documents.
Right.
But it's really a function of, hey, we moved here about 5 years ago. Those documents were done 5 years prior to that. A lot's happened in 10 years of our lifespan. We need someone to review this.
Right. And laws could change.
Laws could change.
State laws change somewhat regularly and also by administration.
Correct. And we're going to see that in a future podcast. We're going to see that in the future with the elections, where that will go. But to circle back to wills, and what does a will even do?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because generally I think a lot of people just say, oh, the will is there to get me some inheritance or whatever my legacy is going to be that a parent or a grandparent or someone is going to leave to those people in the family that are fortunate to get some kind of legacy, be it property, be it actual money, some kind of asset. But there's another aspect to that, and that the will helps the estate be navigated through what we call probate.
Correct. So,
and let's talk about, I also want to delve into what happens when there isn't a will, because that's to me the motivation for having that will.
So, great point. First and foremost, I get this comment all the time. Mom died, there's a will, there's no need for probate. That is a complete misnomer. It has nothing to do, probate has nothing to do with whether or not you have a will.
Right.
So what is the point of a will? I'm going to tell you. It's a rhetorical question.
Right,
John.
right. I know it is. I know.
The point of a will is if there's an asset that has to go through a probate process, a court process, to get from a dead person's name to their beneficiaries, whoever they may be, that's probate. Okay, so what does the will do? The will says if there's an asset that has to go through that probate process, this is who the beneficiaries are. This is who I pick as the personal representative, which is the same as an executor. Okay, so up north they call them an executor or an executrix if you're a female. In Florida, we're gender neutral. It's a personal representative. Right. That's the person that's going to administer the estate, make sure that all the payments, creditors get paid, payments get made to whoever they have to get made to, any accountings that may have to be done, all that stuff. So that's what the will does. It's a guideline, right? It's a guideline to the judge. And to your point, if you don't have a will,
There's no guidelines.
There's no guide.
There's no
Well,
direction.
it'll go pursuant to the statutes of the state in which you last resided and where you died. So in Florida, it would go by Florida statute to whoever those statutes say, and to for I would say 25-30% of Palm Beach County, there's second marriages, there's other complications. So Florida statutes may not have assets going to the people that you want, never mind the method that you want. And let me explain that for a moment. In the state of Florida, and I think in most states, age of majority is 18. So if I don't have a will and I die, and I'm going to use myself as an example just for clarification purposes. And what I didn't say earlier was that I have twins that are 8.5. I'm married. I have twins that are 8.5, almost 9. My daughter has special needs. So my plan is going to look a lot different than the average.
Then say my plan.
Than your plan. But let's just take, for example, if my wife and I died and things were going to go to my kids, if there's no will, then it'll stay in some sort of guardianship, let's say, for the minor child until they're 18. And at 18, they get the money outright or the assets outright. So what does that practically look like? I mean, if my wife and I had $3 million of life insurance, my son turns 18, he gets $1.5 million outright. That's not what I want. What's my son going to do with $1.5 million? He's going to go buy Fortnite, V-Bucks or whatever.
And a very cool car.
And a very cool car, exactly.
Right.
So, within the will, you can dictate where those assets go, and to who they go to, but also how they receive those assets. Typically, when you have minor children, it stays in further trust for their benefit. Okay, they still get access to it. It's limited, but pretty robust. But it's not an outright distribution of money or assets outright at 18. So that's a really important concept that, especially for the demographics of people that have minor children or children with other issues.
Sure.
Okay. That's something to just keep in mind.
Yeah. So there are, like we were saying before, there are different aspects to the and different motivations for why pretty much everybody should have a will. Let's look at some statistics, because it is pretty interesting if we break things down by age, household income, even race and ethnicity. It's pretty startling how many people don't even have a basic will.
Sure. So I think that the statistics that they're putting up on the screen right now. So, when you talk about the 65 plus years old, it's higher than obviously the 19 to 29, right?
Which makes sense.
But I think it's an overall trend as when you see 100,000 or more, the older you are, the more educated you are, and race and ethnicity obviously plays a part of it. I think it's more of a socioeconomic versus race and ethnicity.
Yes.
I think it's more of a socioeconomic because people always think, and it's unfortunate, they think of, I don't have a ton of money, so I don't need to do something. I don't need to plan because I don't have that
I've
much.
come across that.
And
as an
the
advisor.
reason why you see on the slide,
Right.
that obviously people that are 65 and older probably as a whole have more assets value-wise, so they're thinking about it more. They're also closer to mortality. And I think the two biggest things that we've spoken about, numerous times before, why do people not do a will or talk about estate planning, is because it's uncomfortable. You're talking about your own mortality. So people don't want to do that. That's one aspect to it. But I think that, as you see, the more educated, the more money you have, and the older you are, you're probably closer to that mortality talk because it's coming. So that's why those numbers are skewed up. The other thing that I think that we need to think about is when you have minor children, like I do, who's going to be the guardian? Who's going to take physical custody of those kids? And that, to me, is the reason why people my age, again, turning 43, young kids, the reason why people my age are hesitant to talk about estate planning or to even implement an estate plan. Who's going to get my kids?
Right.
I love my sister, but we have different values. They may not have another sibling, right? So who are they going to leave it to? Their parents are older, grandparents are older. So short of leaving it to your best friends who your kids know and who they trust and who you trust and have the same values as you, that's an analysis paralysis that we constantly talk about
Absolutely.
that is keeping people from doing the right thing of putting an estate plan in place.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, from my experience in dealing with clients, it's not always the money, although that plays a part in it because someone says, "Well, I don't want to spend $1,000 on a will with an attorney, and then also have a trust drawn up." But I think even more than that, it comes down to these other moving parts that potentially complicate that picture for them.
Sure. I mean, one thing that you mentioned that I think is important today, we're talking about wills. The same planning that you do in a will, the body of the will, can be done in a revocable living trust or in a trust document, which we'll talk about on
On
another
another episode,
on another
yes.
round. But one thing to just to really hone in on is while you're alive, you can direct where you want things to go and who's going to manage these things for your family members. And by the way, there's a difference between money and people. Some people are great with kids and they're terrible with money. So you can bifurcate the two, you know. And when it comes to one other thing I want to mention is within the will, you can also do some tax planning, estate tax planning, if the situation arises and now the numbers are super high. To have a taxable estate, you need close to 14 million per person. Husband and wife can do some tax planning and double that. That will go down if Congress does nothing to 7 million
Soon.
soon. And granted, here in Boca Raton, Florida, 7 million is maybe not as much. And again, you could double it for husband and wife. But to the rest of the country, 7 million is a lot of money. To me, 7 million is a lot of money.
I was about to say that's a lot of money to me.
But just throwing out there that even if you decided, I don't want to do a trust, it's complicated and whatnot, the same tax planning you can do under a will as under a trust. Keep in mind, the will does not avoid probate.
Right.
Okay, and that's the biggest.
It's a roadmap.
It's a roadmap, but it's the biggest misconception that I think people have is that the will avoid probate.
No, but what it will do is simplify probate, and really what you're
It will streamline it.
right. And
It'll streamline it.
Right, and probate is not a quick and easy process generally.
Probate in every state is different, and this is an interesting topic because I get this pretty often. People come from the Northeast, and they only know of a will because probate in the Northeast is a little bit easier than probate in Florida. In Florida, we're very creditor friendly, I like to say. There's if you go through a formal probate in the state of Florida, you have a 90-day creditor period. So if you add it all up from the day that you meet with an attorney, let's say you met with me on a Monday and you signed up, and I had all the information from you. We prepare all the documents, we send it to you, you sign it. Then you have to get the estate open, and that takes a couple of days. So you're looking at about I would say a month period, and every county is different. So you're looking at about a month period just to open an estate. Then you have a 90-day creditor period potentially. So you're talking about 4, 5, 6 months minimum for a probate. Right. And that's if it's an easy one. That's if there's no issues. Most estates are typically about a year, about 12 months. Some a little more, some a little less. Certainly if there's contestments, it gets longer and it gets dicier. I don't handle those. I don't litigate. I'm too nice. Not for me. Right. But those are the hiccups that we talk about in a probate proceeding. But again, to circle back into your point, probate, when you have a will, streamlines it. It makes it infinitely easier. One caveat, and I think this is really important for the audience, and you mentioned something about people not wanting to pay for things, right? It's pay now or pay later. And what I mean by that, I had a potential client come to my office through a mutual friend. And as a courtesy to this friend, who's also an attorney, we refer a lot of business to each other. And it was a friend of his dying of cancer. He's still alive. But he in an abundance of caution, he did an estate plan online. He went onto LegalZoom and he started, and he did it. He prepared everything that he wanted to prepare. He asked me to review it just to see if there was anything that was okay. And I hate doing that, right? I didn't charge for it because it was a friend of a dear friend of mine. And B, I don't like commenting on other people's work. Now, I didn't feel as bad on this one because it was his work,
His work online.
online,
On a template.
but on a template. But my caution is this: those online programs are great for input output, like anything else. Whatever you put into it, it's going to spit out.
Right. Sure.
But there's a lot of nuance there, and the issue with this person's will and trust and all those
And estate,
documents,
yes.
it wasn't executed properly. It was complete. I mean, it was completely not executed properly. And so I had, he spent all this money to do this. And I worked something out with him where I said, listen, if you want me to just be the notary, just to organize it and make it look good for you and valid, I'll charge you a fee for just that.
Right.
I'm not commenting on the validity of the actual document nuts and bolts. I'm just going to be the notary and make sure that it's witnessed correctly
Right.
and notarized.
It's set up properly.
Set up properly. But I see that all the time, John. I see, they'll list a personal representative, their best friend from New York. By the way, that best friend, if you're not related or you're not a Florida resident, you don't qualify to serve as personal representative. So all that was for naught.
Right.
No one's going to tell you that on LegalZoom necessarily. An attorney's
Right.
going
They're just going to take your credit card. Thank you very much.
Correct. It's
Mr.
input,
Jones. Input, output. And I think that's, look, just to back up a little bit, one of the reasons why I'm here and we're here is because I want to bring some of these important aspects, and in this case, estate planning, to the audience, where it's not about cutting costs, cutting corners. It's about doing it the right way and working, in my opinion, with a professional, whether it's your estate, whether it's your taxes and working with an accountant, or in my case, whether it's working with an advisor. And obviously, you have to do your due diligence when you choose a professional to work with. But at the end of the day, you're going to cover more bases and have a better chance of the proper work being done. And more importantly, from what your point is, Mark, what matters is the execution. What matters is when you need that to actually work.
to take effect.
To take effect.
Sure.
If that will sits there, or that trust sits there, or that estate plan sits there for 20 years, but then somebody passes away and you find out that the work done
Sure.
wasn't.
I'll give you another example. I'm doing a probate right now for again, a dear friend of mine's grandmother passed away. In the will that she did, God, it must have been like 20 years ago, she listed all these different like trinkets, like literally the chairs or the bedroom set shall go to this one grandson. And by the way, that doesn't even exist anymore. And so, but because they're listed, now we have to, serve them, their parents on their behalf, the papers and all that stuff. So super important to have a professional guide you. I'm not an investment maven at all. I hire a professional such as yourself to do investments. Do you go to a doctor? Do you go to WebMD, or do you go to a doctor
Or a specialist. Right.
That's the importance of it. I can't stress that enough. It's don't be pound wise, penny foolish. I know it sounds trite, and I know it's we say it all the time, but don't be pound wise, penny foolish. Now you don't have to go to me, and I'm not the most expensive. I'm not the dime store guy either. I'm right in the middle, and I tell people all the time, if they come for an initial consultation, you don't have to use me. And in fact, if you set something up with me, and after you're done signing, and then in 5 years, your grandson becomes an estate attorney and he goes to another firm, you can take those documents and as long as they're not irrevocable and unamendable, you can make changes and you could tear it up. You could do a whole new one with somebody else. You're not wedded to me, but do it. Set it in place, set it in motion. One thing that COVID really, I saw an article during COVID and I went to the office. Thankfully, we're in Florida. We can go to the office.
Right.
And there was an article about using some other estate planning techniques that we'll talk about in another podcast for, business continuation because people were getting really sick and then dying. Well, what happens to that business? Who does it go to? Does it go to a partner? Does it go to the surviving spouse? Does the surviving spouse get bought out? Is there life insurance proceeds
Right.
to
A
buy out
buy-sell
a buy
agreement.
sell?
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So all these things, when you think of estate planning, it's not just setting up a will and setting and forgetting. It's setting up the will to make sure that what you own goes to the people that you want on a very basic level.
Right. And kind of to go full circle here and kind of try to wrap things up. Uh, I wanted to talk first about wills because, in my opinion, it's usually the first thing people focus on when they're going out to do, if they're not going to do a whole package all at once. But obviously, I think most adults, especially if they're in their 40s, their 50s, and 60s, have learned is, like you said, there is a number of other aspects of estate planning, whether it's a living will, whether it's a health directive, that everyone should also have. And again, we'll address those things because I think they're each very important and vital for most people to have. And I think we see that maybe more so down here in Florida, given the demographic, than somebody might in, New York or even New Jersey or Nashville or Atlanta or something. You just have that demographic here where you have a lot of older people and you do have a lot of their family living in this area as well.
Sure. So, and you're right. They used to call South Florida God's waiting room, and I grew up in South Florida, right? So they used to say God's waiting room. Look,
Yes.
go up and down Collins Avenue and down in Miami Beach, and you would see all these, older buildings with the old people sitting on the porches and all that stuff. It's interesting. We are seeing that migration from the Northeast, from other states, from the West Coast to Florida.
Right.
And it's not just older people for retirement. It's now that we can all work remotely, we're moving. And so I always say, even if you're a single person, if you have assets, right? So I have a client right now. He's getting married for the first time. I want to say he's in his 30s, no kids, never been married. He's got a great business, probably worth $3-4 million. Where do you want it to go? Do you want it to and those are important decisions, so it's not just, and back to that initial slide, that 19 to 29-year-old or the 30 to 49-year-old, only 20 to 36% of the people are thinking about these things.
Which is shocking because there are certainly in this day and age, even if you look at the 40 to 49 bracket, to think that less than, when you're talking about 35 to 40% have just a will.
And those are the and those are that 30 to 49 years old, right? Those are the people that need it the most. Those are the typically again in South Florida there's a lot of second marriages, but typically
Yes.
the 30 to 49-year-olds are people like me. They're young professionals. They all have young kids. What, God forbid, you go on a trip with your wife to Europe over the
Something
summer
happens.
and something happens. Who's going to watch you? Who's going to take over your kids? Now, what will happen is my parents, my wife's parents, siblings, everyone's going to, grandparents, everyone's going to
The
come out
village steps in.
to steps in, but it's a court proceeding, and the judge is going to hear from everybody. The judge is going to determine who the judge thinks will be in the best interest of that child or children. You can skip all that because the judge you'll still have that proceeding if you died, but the judge will take deference to who you chose,
Right.
because
To the plan you
to
set
the
up.
plan you set up,
Right.
and that's done in a will in Florida. That declaration of guardian for minor children is done in the will.
Right.
So, yes, these are super important. Where you want things to go, especially your most beloved possessions, your children, right? Not just your money, although to some people that's their child,
Right.
that's their baby, their businesses. But at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Where does it go?
And I think that's a really good place for us to kind of wrap things up and stop, because that's what, like Mark is saying, that's what a will is all about. Where do you want it to go, specifically who you want it to go, and in what way do you want your assets to be distributed, and your legacy, if you have children, how you want them to be taken care of. So I think that's a good place for us to stop. I want to thank Mark for being my first guest. And
This was an honor and a privilege, John. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm excited. I'm excited for us to tackle some of these other estate planning topics. And again, I want to thank everybody that's our audience for listening to the Peak Wealth podcast. And remember that our episodes are on Spotify and Apple and YouTube. So please take a listen, and we will be back again with another great topic. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate you.